I was holding my father's hand when he died. His skin felt like paper, thin, cold, fragile. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and settles there, reminding you that some things can't be undone, only endured. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and regret, and the machines around us beeped in a rhythm that felt like a countdown I'd been running from my whole life. Ava. His voice cracked, barely a whisper. I'm sorry, 2 words. 33 years too late. I looked down at him. This man who once stood 6'3" in his Sunday suit, commanding a congregation of 300 with a voice that could shake the rafters. Pastor Charles Robinson, the man who taught me scripture before I could read, the man who told me I was his little blessing every morning at breakfast, the same man who looked me dead in the eyes when I was 17, pregnant and terrified, and said, "You're not my daughter anymore." I remember that night like it's tattooed on my soul. The way his jaw clenched, the way my mother's hand flew to her mouth, the way my baby brother peeked around the corner, confused, watching his big sister get erased from the family portrait in real time. "You've shamed this family," he said, his voice steady as a judge delivering a sentence. "You've shamed me. You've shamed God. Pack your things and get out." I was 17. I had nowhere to go. I begged him. I actually got on my knees and begged, but he turned his back and walked into his office, closing the door like I was already gone. But my mother didn't. Grace Robinson, soft-spoken, Sunday school teaching, flower dress-wearing Grace, stood up that night in a way I'd never seen before. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked at my father, said, "Then I'm going with her," and started packing. She left her marriage, her home, her church, her entire life for me. Now 18 years later, I'm standing over the man who threw us away, watching him struggle to breathe, and all I can feel is this awful, heavy mix of rage and grief and something I can't even name. Because my mother's gone now too. COVID took her 2 years ago, and she never got this moment, this apology, this reckoning. She died still loving the man who chose his pride over his daughter. Still praying he'd come around, and now he's here, dying, squeezing my hand like it's a lifeline, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to do what she would have done. My son, Malik, 18, 6'2", the best quarterback Georgia's seen in a decade, is standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder. His jersey hangs in the Hall of Fame at his high school. His name is on the lips of every scout in the South, the name my father tried to erase is now the name everyone in this city knows, and the man who made me feel like nothing is begging me to make him feel like something again. Before we go back to where it all started, I want to know, where are you watching this from? What city? What state? What country? Drop it in the comments. Because this story, it's not just mine. It's about family, forgiveness, and what happens when love has to fight for its place at the table. And I have a feeling some of you know exactly what that feels like. I need to take you back to the beginning, to the night everything fell apart. It was August in Atlanta, the kind of heat that sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe even when you're standing still. The cicadas were screaming outside, and inside our house on Cascade Avenue, the air conditioning hummed like it was trying to drown out the silence that had been growing between me and my father for weeks. I was 17, a senior at Benjamin E. Mays High School, honor roll, church youth group leader, the girl who wore modest dresses and said yes sir and no ma'am without being reminded. I was exactly who my father raised me to be, until I wasn't. I'd been throwing up every morning for 2 weeks. At first I told myself it was stress, senior year, college applications, the pressure of being Pastor Robinson's daughter. It all made sense until it didn't. Until I took the test in the bathroom at school, hands shaking so hard I could barely read the result. Pregnant. 6 weeks. I sat on that cold tile floor for 20 minutes, staring at those 2 pink lines like if I looked hard enough, one of them might disappear, but they didn't. And I knew that my life as I understood it was over. The father was Marcus. Marcus Williams, a boy from my chemistry class who had kind eyes and big dreams about studying engineering at Morehouse. We'd been dating in secret for 4 months because my father had rules about dating. No boys until college. And even then, only if they were worthy of a Robinson woman. Marcus was a good guy, but he wasn't from our church, and that alone would have been enough for my father to shut it down. When I told Marcus about the pregnancy, he held my hand in his beat-up Honda in the school parking lot and cried. Not because he didn't care, but because he was 18 and terrified and honest enough to admit he had no idea what to do. His family was struggling. His scholarship to Morehouse was his way out. "I'll do whatever you need," he said. And I believed him. But I also knew what whatever you need looked like for a boy with everything to lose. It looked like child support payments and weekend visits and a life split down the middle. I told him I'd figure it out. I told him to go to Morehouse. I told him I'd be okay. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I said it anyway. For 3 weeks, I carried that secret like a stone in my stomach. I'd sit at the dinner table across from my father, listening to him talk about righteousness and discipline, and the importance of living a life that honors God and family, and I'd feel that stone getting heavier. My mother knew something was wrong. Grace Robinson had this way of seeing through you, not in a harsh way, but in the way only a mother can. She'd watch me push food around my plate, notice when I excused myself to the bathroom too quickly, catch me staring out the window with tears I didn't know I was crying. "Baby, you okay?" she'd ask, her hand soft on my shoulder. "I'm fine, Mama." I'd lie, but I wasn't fine, and eventually, I couldn't carry it alone anymore. It was a Sunday night. My father was in his office working on next week's sermon. My little brother Joshua was asleep upstairs. My mother was in the kitchen, washing dishes and humming an old hymn. Something about grace and mercy that felt like a knife in my chest. I walked into that kitchen, and the words came out before I could stop them. "Mama, I'm pregnant." She froze. Her hands were still in the soapy water, suds dripping from her fingers. For a moment I thought maybe she hadn't heard me, but then she turned around and I saw it. The fear, the heartbreak, the love all tangled together in her eyes. "Oh, baby." She dried her hands and pulled me into her arms. And I broke. I sobbed into her shoulder like I was 5 years old again, like she could fix this with a hug and a prayer. "Does your father know?" she whispered. I shook my head. She pulled back, held my face in her hands. "We'll tell him together, tonight." I wanted to say no. I wanted to run, but I nodded. Because I was 17 and scared and still believed that maybe, my father's love was bigger than his pride. It wasn't. We walked into his office together, my mother's hand gripping mine. He looked up from his Bible, reading glasses perched on his nose, and smiled, until he saw our faces. "What's wrong?" he asked, standing up. My mother looked at me. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, so she said it for me. "Charles, Ava's pregnant." The smile didn't fade slowly. It shattered, like glass hitting concrete. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I watched him see someone else. Not his daughter, not his little blessing, someone who had disappointed him beyond repair. "You're lying," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm not," I whispered. "How far along?" 6 weeks. "Who?" "A boy from school." "From our church?" "No," his jaw clenched. "Does he know?" "Yes. And he wants to help, but what? He doesn't want to marry you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My father walked around his desk, and for a second, I thought he might hug me. I thought he might tell me we'd figure it out together. That family meant forgiveness. Instead, he pointed to the door. "Get out." My mother gasped. "Charles, I said get out!" His voice boomed, the same voice that filled the sanctuary every Sunday, except now it was aimed at me like a weapon. "You've disgraced this family. You've disgraced me. You've made a mockery of everything I've taught you. Daddy, please." I was crying now, begging, my hands clasped together like I was praying. "Don't call me that. You're not my daughter anymore. My daughter knows better. My daughter has self-respect. You?" He looked at me with such disgust that I felt it in my bones. "You're just another statistic. Another foolish girl who threw her life away. Charles." My mother stepped between us, her voice sharp. "That's enough." "No, Grace, it's not enough. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. She wants to be grown. She can be grown somewhere else. She's 17. And she made an adult decision. Now she can live with it, away from this house. I'll never forget the way my mother looked at him in that moment. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than any argument. If she leaves, my mother said quietly, I leave too. My father laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You're not serious. I've never been more serious in my life. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. And then my father turned his back on both of us. Then go, he said. Both of you. My mother didn't hesitate. She took my hand and led me upstairs. We packed in silence, clothes, pictures, my mother's Bible. I heard my little brother's door creak open. Ava, Joshua's voice was small, confused. Go back to bed, baby, my mother said gently. Where are you going? I couldn't answer. I just hugged him tight and left. We walked out of that house with 2 suitcases and $63 between us. My mother didn't look back, but I did. I saw my father standing in the window of his office watching us leave. And I swear, for just a second, I saw his hand come up, like he wanted to stop us, but he didn't, and we were gone. We spent that first night in my mother's car, a 2003 Toyota Camry with a broken air conditioner and a rosary hanging from the rearview mirror. We parked in the lot behind Greater Mount Olive Baptist Church. Not our church, but one my mother knew from her teachers' union meetings. She said we'd be safe there for the night, that God would watch over us. I wasn't so sure God was watching anymore. I sat in the passenger seat with my knees pulled to my chest, staring out at the sodium lights casting orange shadows across the empty parking lot. The August heat was suffocating, even with the windows cracked. Sweat stuck my shirt to my back, and I could smell the faint scent of my mother's perfume mixed with fear and uncertainty. Mama, I whispered into the darkness. I'm sorry. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached over and took my hand. Don't you dare apologize to me, Ava Grace Robinson. Don't you dare. But you left everything. I left nothing that mattered more than you. Her voice was firm, but gentle. The same voice she used when I was little and scared of thunderstorms. You are my daughter. You are my blood. And there is nothing you could ever do that would make me turn my back on you. I started crying again. I'd been doing a lot of that. What are we going to do? I asked. She squeezed my hand. We're going to survive. We're going to pray. And we're going to trust that God has a plan, even when we can't see it. I wanted to believe her, but all I could see was the wreckage of everything I'd known. My father's face, the locked door, the life I'd lost in one conversation. We slept in that car, or tried to. My mother dozed in and out, her head resting against the window while I stayed awake, one hand on my still flat stomach, trying to imagine the tiny life growing inside me, trying to figure out how I was supposed to be someone's mother when I'd just lost my own father. When dawn broke, my mother sat up, smoothed her dress, and turned to me with the kind of determination I'd only seen when she was advocating for her students at parent-teacher conferences. First things first, she said. We need a place to stay. I have a friend, Angela's mother, Mrs. Patterson. She has a rental property in East Point. It's small, but it's something. Can we afford it? My mother smiled, a sad, tired smile. We'll figure it out. I have my teaching salary. It's not much, but it'll keep us afloat until you graduate, and we can figure out next steps. Next steps, like my life was just a problem to be solved, an equation to be balanced. But my mother made it sound possible. She always did. Mrs. Patterson met us at the property that afternoon. It was a basement apartment in a duplex. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom with rust stains in the tub. The carpet was beige and worn thin in places, and there was a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of somewhere I didn't want to go. But it had 4 walls and a lock on the door, and that was more than we'd had 12 hours ago. First month is on me, Mrs. Patterson said, pressing the key into my mother's hand. You get on your feet, Grace, you hear me? My mother hugged her, and I saw tears slip down her cheeks, the first tears I'd seen her cry since we left. We moved in with our 2 suitcases and nothing else. No furniture, no dishes, no pictures on the walls. My mother borrowed an air mattress from Mrs. Patterson, and we slept side by side on the floor of that single bedroom, the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the only sound breaking the silence. School started 2 weeks later. Walking back into Benjamin E. Mays High School felt like walking onto a stage where everyone already knew my lines. The stares started the moment I stepped through the doors. Whispers followed me down the hallway like a second shadow. That's Pastor Robinson's daughter. I heard she got kicked out. I heard she's pregnant. Who's the father? I kept my head down, my arms wrapped around my books like armor. Marcus saw me in the hallway between 3rd and 4th period. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the weight of everything unsaid hung between us like a wall. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey, you okay?" I almost laughed. "Okay, what a word." "I'm fine," I lied. He nodded, because what else could he do? We were 2 kids trying to navigate something we had no map for. "If you need anything?" "I know. Thank you." He walked away, and I watched him disappear into the crowd of students who still had normal problems. Homework and prom dates, and college applications that mattered. My problems were different now. At lunch, I sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich my mother had packed that morning. I felt the nausea rising again, the morning sickness that apparently didn't care what time of day it was, and I rushed to the bathroom, barely making it to the stall before I threw up. When I came out, there was a girl washing her hands at the sink, Angela Harris. We'd been in the same Sunday school class for years, though we'd never been close. She looked at me in the mirror. "You good?" she asked. I nodded, wiping my mouth with a paper towel. She didn't leave. Instead, she dug through her backpack and pulled out a pack of gum. "Here, peppermint helps." I took it, surprised. "Thanks. You're Ava, right? Pastor Robinson's daughter?" "Was," I corrected. She raised an eyebrow but didn't push. "I'm Angela. Angela Harris. My mom knows your mom. They teach at the same district." "Yeah, I know. Your mom helped us find an apartment." She smiled. "My mom's like that. Can't help herself." She leaned against the sink, studying me. "Look, I don't know what you're going through, but I know what it's like when people talk. My older sister got pregnant in high school, too. People acted like she'd committed murder." I looked up at her, surprised by the honesty. "Where's your sister now?" I asked. "Nursing school. Her daughter's 5. They're doing good." She shrugged. "It's hard, but it's not the end of the world, you know? Even though people act like it is." I felt something crack open in my chest, something that had been sealed shut since my father pointed to the door. Hope, maybe. Or just the realization that I wasn't completely alone. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Angela said with a grin. "Wait until you meet my crew. We're loud, we're messy, and we don't take crap from anybody." She became my friend that day, my first real friend in a life that felt like it had been stripped down to nothing. The months that followed were a blur of survival. Mother worked her teaching job during the day and picked up a second job waitressing at a diner 3 nights a week. I went to school, came home, did my homework, and tried not to think about the fact that my body was changing in ways I couldn't control. By October, I was showing. Not much, but enough that the whispers got louder. Enough that teachers started looking at me with pity. Enough that the youth pastor at our old church sent my mother a letter, saying I wasn't welcome at services anymore because my presence might send the wrong message to the other young women. My mother burned that letter in the kitchen sink. "Hypocrites," she muttered, watching the paper curl and blacken. "Jesus ate with sinners, but they can't even sit in the same room as a pregnant girl." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all. But mostly, I was just tired. In November, my mother took me to my first prenatal appointment at Grady Memorial Hospital. We sat in a waiting room full of other women, some with partners, some with mothers, some alone. I filled out forms with questions I didn't know how to answer. Father's name? Marcus Williams' father involved? I don't know. Support system? My mother. The ultrasound technician was a black woman in her 40s with kind eyes and steady hands. She squeezed the cold gel onto my stomach and moved the wand across my skin, and suddenly, there it was, a heartbeat, Fast and strong and impossibly real. "There's your baby," the technician said, pointing to a tiny flickering spot on the screen. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I stared at that screen, at that tiny flutter of life, and for the first time since the night my father kicked me out, I felt something other than fear. I felt love. Not the complicated, conditional love I'd known before, but something pure and uncomplicated and fierce. This baby, this tiny, unexpected, unwanted by some baby, was mine, and I was going to fight for him the way my mother was fighting for me. "It's a boy," the technician said with a smile. "A boy." "My son." I looked at my mother, and she was crying. Happy tears this time. "What are you going to name him?" she asked. I thought about it. About legacy and fresh starts and the man I hoped my son would become. "Malik," I said. "It means king." My mother nodded, squeezing my hand. "King Malik Robinson. I like that." We left that appointment with a grainy ultrasound photo and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. My son was coming, and we were going to be ready. Malik came into the world on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 weeks early, and screaming like he had something to prove. I'd been having contractions since midnight, but I didn't want to wake my mother. She'd been working double shifts all week, teaching during the day, waitressing until close, and I could hear her exhausted breathing from the air mattress we still shared. So I lay there in the dark, counting the minutes between waves of pain, one hand on my enormous belly, trying to remember the breathing exercises from the prenatal class my mother had insisted we take. By 4 a.m., I couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Mama," I whispered, my voice tight. "Mama, I think it's time." She was awake instantly, switching into the mode I'd come to recognize over the past 8 months. Grace Robinson, the woman who solved problems, who made the impossible possible, who refused to let her daughter face anything alone. We made it to Grady Memorial Hospital by 5:30. The sun was just starting to paint the Atlanta skyline pink and gold, and I remember thinking how strange it was that the world could look so beautiful while I felt like I was being torn in half. Labor was 16 hours of hell. Nobody tells you how lonely it feels, even when you're not alone. My mother held my hand through every contraction, wiped my forehead with a cool cloth, whispered prayers and encouragements that blurred together into a soundtrack of survival. But there were moments, long, dark moments between the pain, where I felt utterly isolated. Marcus wasn't there. He'd tried to be involved during the pregnancy, really tried. But by January he'd started at Morehouse, and his calls became less frequent, his visits more strained. When I told him I'd gone into labor, he said he'd try to come by after his engineering midterm. He never showed up. My father wasn't there. Obviously. I hadn't heard from him in 8 months. For all I knew, he'd forgotten I existed, or wished I didn't. It was just me, and my mother and a rotating cast of nurses who'd seen hundreds of teenage mothers come through these doors and probably expected nothing from me except another sad statistic. But then, at 9:47 p.m., everything changed. Malik Robinson came into the world weighing 6 pounds, 4 ounces, with a full head of black hair and lungs that could wake the dead. The doctor placed him on my chest, this tiny, perfect, screaming miracle, and I swear to God, time stopped. He smelled like vernix and possibility. His little fists were clenched tight, like he was ready to fight the world. His eyes, dark and unfocused, searched the room until they found mine, and in that moment, I understood something my father never did. Love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. "Hi, baby," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Hi, Malik, I'm your mama. I got you. I promise I got you." My mother stood beside the bed, tears streaming down her face, her hand on my shoulder. "Look at him, Ava," she breathed. "Look what you made." I looked, and I saw everything. Every sleepless night ahead, every sacrifice I'd have to make, every dream I'd have to postpone. But I also saw purpose. I saw a reason to keep going when everything felt impossible. I saw my son. They kept us in the hospital for 2 days. I learned how to breastfeed, which was way harder than anyone admits. How to change a diaper. How to swaddle a squirming baby who hated being contained. The nurses were patient with me, more patient than I expected. And one of them, an older black woman named Ms. Dorothy, pulled me aside before we were discharged. "You're going to be fine," she said, her hand warm on my arm. "I've been doing this for 30 years, and I can tell the ones who are going to make it. You got that look in your eyes? That determination. Don't lose that. What if I mess up?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been circling my brain since Malik was born. "You will mess up," she said simply. "Every mother does. But you'll also figure it out. And that baby?" She nodded toward Malik, asleep in his bassinet. "He don't need perfect. He just needs you." I carried those words home with me like a talisman. Home was still that basement apartment in East Point, but my mother had transformed it during my hospital stay. She'd borrowed a crib from Mrs. Patterson, set up a changing table made from a dresser she'd found at Goodwill, and hung up the handful of baby clothes we'd collected from the free clinic and church donations. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Those first few weeks were a fog of feeding schedules and diaper changes, and a kind of exhaustion I didn't know existed. Malik had his days and nights confused, which meant I was up every 2 hours, pacing the tiny apartment with a screaming baby, singing off-key lullabies I half remembered from my own childhood. My mother helped when she could, but she was still working those double shifts, still keeping us afloat financially. I'd dropped out of high school 2 months before graduation. The stares and whispers had become unbearable, and my guidance counselor suggested I finish my diploma through the GED program instead. "Less stressful for everyone," she'd said, which really meant less embarrassing for the school. So I studied for my GED in the stolen hours when Malik slept. My textbooks spread out on the kitchen table, his bassinet pulled close so I could reach out and touch him, reassure myself he was real and breathing in mine. I passed the test in May. My mother bought a small cake from Kroger, and we celebrated in our cramped kitchen with Malik dozing in my arms. "I'm proud of you. Baby," my mother said, cutting 2 slices. "This is just the beginning." "Beginning of what?" I asked, because I honestly couldn't see past the next feeding, the next diaper change, the next impossible day. "Of your life," she said simply. "You think this is the end?" "This is just the first chapter." I wanted to believe her, but I was 18 years old, living in a basement apartment with a newborn and no prospects. The girls I'd graduated with, or would have graduated with, were posting pictures on Facebook of their college acceptance letters and prom dresses and summer plans. I was posting nothing. I'd deleted my social media months ago, tired of the judgment, tired of watching everyone else's life move forward while mine stood still. But then Malik would smile, those early, gassy smiles that everyone says don't mean anything but feel like everything, and I'd remember why I was doing this. Angela started coming around more. She'd bring her sister Keisha and Keisha's daughter Zara, and the apartment would fill with noise and laughter and the chaotic energy of young motherhood. Keisha was 21, working as a medical assistant, and she took me under her wing in a way I desperately needed. "Nobody tells you how hard it is," Keisha said one afternoon, watching Zara and Malik, now 4 months old, lying on a blanket on the floor. Not because they want you to fail, but because if they told you the truth, nobody would ever have kids. "So what's the secret?" I asked. "There is no secret," she laughed. "You just survive, one day at a time. Some days you're going to cry in the shower because you're so tired you can't see straight. Some days you're going to resent that baby for taking everything from you. And then some days, he's going to do something, laugh or grab your finger or sleep through the night, and you'll remember why you kept going." She was right. There were dark days. Days when I looked at Malik and felt nothing but resentment. Days when I mourned the life I'd lost. The college tours I'd never take. The dorm room I'd never decorate. The future that felt like it belonged to someone else now. But there were also bright days. Days when Malik's laugh, this pure, joyful sound, would erupt from his tiny body and fill every corner of our small apartment. Days when my mother would come home exhausted, but still insist on taking Malik so I could shower in peace. Days when I'd look at my son and feel a love so fierce it scared me. By the time Malik turned 1, I'd found a rhythm. Not a perfect rhythm, there's no such thing, but something sustainable. I got a job working the front desk at a pediatric clinic in downtown Atlanta. The pay was barely minimum wage, but it came with health insurance and something I hadn't expected: inspiration. I watched the nurses move through that clinic with purpose and compassion, treating scared kids and exhausted parents with equal parts competence and kindness. I watched them solve problems, ease pain, make impossible situations bearable, and I thought, I could do that. One of the nurses, a woman named Linda who reminded me of Ms. Dorothy from the hospital, noticed me watching. "You thinking about nursing school?" she asked one afternoon during a slow period. "Is it that obvious?" I laughed nervously. "You've got the right disposition for it," she said. "Patient, calm under pressure, good with the babies. You should look into it. Georgia State has a good program." "I've got a 1-year-old and no money," I said, the practicality of my life crushing the dream before it could fully form. "There's financial aid, scholarships, programs specifically for single mothers." She pulled out a brochure from behind the desk. "At least look into it. What's the worst that could happen?" I took the brochure home and left it on the kitchen table where my mother would see it. She did. "You applying?" she asked that night, Malik asleep in his crib, the two of us eating leftover spaghetti in comfortable silence. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. "Work, school, Malik. It's too much." My mother set down her fork and looked at me with those eyes that had seen me through every impossible moment of the last 2 years. "Ava, do you know why I left your father?" I blinked, surprised by the question. "We didn't talk about him, ever, because he kicked me out," I said. "No," she shook her head. "I left because he forgot what love actually means. He thought love was about control and appearances and making people fit into boxes he'd built." "But real love?" She reached across the table and took my hand. "Real love is about helping people become who they're meant to be, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Mama, you're meant to be a nurse, baby. I can see it. So you're going to apply, and you're going to get in, and I'm going to help you with Malik, and we're going to figure it out." "Together," I cried. Again. I'd been doing that a lot over the past 2 years. But these were different tears. These were tears of hope. I applied to Georgia State's nursing program in September. I wrote an essay about Malik's birth, about Ms. Dorothy's kindness, about wanting to be for other people what those nurses had been for me. In December, I got my acceptance letter. Malik was 18 months old, pulling himself up on furniture and saying "mama" like it was the only word that mattered. I was 19 years old, accepted into nursing school, and terrified. But I was also ready, because my mother was right. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Nursing school was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and I'd given birth in a public hospital with no epidural, so that's saying something. I started classes at Georgia State in January, when Malik was 19 months old and my mother had just turned 50. We'd developed a system by then, a carefully choreographed dance of schedules and sacrifices that depended on both of us never getting sick, never being late, never faltering. My classes started at 8 a.m. 3 days a week, which meant I had to have Malik dressed, fed, and at Mrs. Patterson's house by 7:15. My mother would pick him up at 3:30 after her teaching day ended, bring him home, feed him dinner, and start his bedtime routine. I'd get home around 9 most nights, after lectures, study groups, and my shifts at the pediatric clinic, just in time to kiss my sleeping son goodnight and collapse into bed myself. The other 2 days, I worked at the clinic and studied whenever Malik napped. Weekends were for catching up on everything we'd missed during the week. Laundry, grocery shopping, quality time with Malik that didn't feel rushed or fractured. There was no social life, no dating, no time for anything that wasn't school, work, or motherhood. Angela asked me once if I ever felt like I was missing out. We were sitting in my apartment on a rare, free Saturday afternoon, watching Malik and Zara play with blocks on the floor. Keisha had just finished her shift at the hospital and looked as exhausted as I felt. Missing out on what? I asked. I don't know. Being young. Going out. Having fun. Angela shrugged. You're 20 years old, Ava. Most people our age are at parties and doing stupid stuff. I looked at Malik, who was currently trying to stack blocks taller than himself, his little face scrunched up in concentration. I did my stupid stuff already, I said. This is what I got from it. You don't mean that, Keisha said quietly. She was right. I didn't. No, I admitted. I don't. But sometimes it feels easier to say it that way, you know. Like if I can convince myself that Malik was a consequence instead of a blessing, then maybe it won't hurt so much that I'm doing this alone. You're not alone, Angela said firmly. You've got your mom. You've got us. You've got Mrs. Patterson and half the church ladies in East Point bringing you casseroles. I smiled, because it was true. The community that had formed around us, mostly black women who understood struggle, who'd raised children in harder circumstances, who believed in lifting each other up, had become a kind of family. But late at night, when Malik was asleep and my mother was in bed, and I was studying anatomy or pharmacology with tired eyes and an exhausted brain, I felt it, that loneliness, that weight of being the only one responsible for another human's entire existence. And I'd think about my father. I'd wonder if he ever thought about us. If he knew he had a grandson, if he cared. My mother never talked about him. She'd cut all ties when we left. Stopped going to the church. Stopped answering calls from mutual friends. Built a life that existed in the space after him. I asked her once during Malik's second birthday party if she missed him. She was frosting a cake, chocolate with blue icing. Malik's favorite colors, and she paused, the spatula hovering over the cake. I miss who I thought he was, she said finally. I miss the man I married, the one who held you when you were born and cried because he was so happy. But that man, she shook her head. I don't know if he ever really existed or if I just wanted him to. Do you think he regrets it? I asked. Kicking me out? I think, my mother said carefully, that your father is a man who built his entire life on being right. And admitting he was wrong about you would mean admitting he was wrong about everything. That's a hard pill to swallow. So he'd rather lose us than admit he messed up. Some people would rather live with regret than humility. She finished frosting the cake and turned to me. But that's his loss, baby. Not yours. You've built something beautiful here. You've got Malik. You're in nursing school. You're going to have a career that matters. He's the one missing out. I wanted to believe that. Most days I did, but there was still a small part of me, the part that was still 17 and begging her father not to send her away, that wondered if I'd ever be enough to make him regret his choice. Malik turned 3 the week I started my clinical rotations. Clinical rotations meant 12-hour shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where I'd given birth to him, learning to insert IVs, administer medications, assess patients, and function on 4 hours of sleep. I was assigned to the pediatric unit, which felt like fate or punishment. I couldn't decide which. My first day, I met a little boy named Jamal. He was 6 years old, diagnosed with leukemia and terrified of needles. His mother sat beside his bed, holding his hand, looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself. Hey, Jamal, I said, kneeling down to his level. I'm Ava. I'm a nursing student, which means I'm still learning, just like you. Can I tell you a secret? He nodded, wide-eyed. I have a little boy at home named Malik. He's 3 years old, and he's scared of needles, too. You know what he does when he has to get a shot? What? He counts? He counts to 10, and he squeezes my hand as hard as he can, and then, before he knows it, it's over. You think you could try that? Jamal looked at his mother. She nodded encouragingly. Okay, he whispered. I inserted the IV while he counted, his small voice steady and brave, and when it was done, he looked up at me with surprise. That's it? That's it. His mother mouthed thank you over his head, tears in her eyes. I left that room and cried in the supply closet for 5 minutes. This was why I was doing this. Not for the paycheck, though God knows we needed that, but for moments like this. for being the person I'd needed when I was scared and alone. My instructor, a stern woman named Professor Chen, pulled me aside at the end of the shift. "You're good with the kids," she said. "Natural. Most students are terrified of pediatrics." "I have a son," I explained. "I've had practice." "How old?" "3, she raised an eyebrow. "You're doing all this with a 3-year-old at home?" "Yes, ma'am." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Keep doing what you're doing. We need more nurses like you." I carried that compliment home like a medal. Malik was with my mother when I got back that night. She'd already fed him dinner, given him a bath, and was reading him a bedtime story when I walked in. "Mama!" He launched himself at me, all 30 pounds of toddler energy and unconditional love. I scooped him up, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. "Hi, baby. Did you have a good day?" "Gamma took me to the park. I went on the swings. Did you go high?" "So high." He spread his arms like wings. I looked at my mother over his head, and she smiled. That tired, satisfied smile of someone who'd given everything and didn't regret a second of it. "Thank you." "Mama," I mouthed. She just nodded. After Malik was asleep, we sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea, a ritual we'd developed over the years. "How was your first clinical?" she asked. I told her about Jamal, about the IV, about crying in the supply closet. "You know why you cried?" she asked. "Because I'm exhausted and emotional? Because you cared." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't ever lose that, Ava. The world has enough people who go through the motions. It needs people who care." "It's hard, though," I admitted. "Caring. It takes so much energy." "Everything worth doing takes energy." She sipped her tea. "You think being a mother isn't hard? You think leaving your father wasn't hard? Hard is part of the deal. But you know what's harder?" "What?" "Regret." Her eyes were distant, like she was seeing something I couldn't. "Looking back and wishing you'd tried. Wishing you'd cared more, loved harder, been braver. That's the stuff that haunts you." I thought about my father then, about whether he was haunted. "Do you think he ever thinks about us?" I asked quietly. My mother was silent for a long moment. "I think," she said finally, "that your father thinks about you every single day. And I think it's killing him slowly to know what he lost. But I also think he's too proud to admit it, and that's a prison of his own making. Would you ever talk to him again? If he reached out?" She considered this. "I don't know, maybe. But not for him, for me. Because forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about putting down the weight you've been carrying." "Have you forgiven him?" I asked. "I'm working on it." She smiled sadly. "It's a process. Some days are easier than others." We sat in comfortable silence after that. Two women who'd survived what should have broken them, drinking tea in a basement apartment that had become home. Malik started preschool that fall. My mother enrolled him in the Head Start program at her school, which meant she could drop him off and pick him up without either of us having to rearrange our schedules. The first day, I had an exam I couldn't miss, so my mother took him alone. She sent me a picture around 9 a.m., Malik in his new backpack, standing in front of his classroom, giving the camera a thumbs up. My brave boy. I stared at that picture during my entire exam. This little person I'd made who was growing up too fast, who didn't remember the nights we'd spent in the car, or the times I'd cried because I didn't think I could do it. He only knew love, stability, a mother who showed up, and a grandmother who sacrificed everything. That was enough. That had to be enough. I was in my final year of nursing school when my mother sat me down and told me she'd been feeling tired. "Not just regular tired," she clarified. "Like bone-deep exhausted, and I've been getting these headaches." "Have you seen a doctor?" I asked, my nursing training kicking in immediately. "I have an appointment next week." "Next week?" "Mama, if you're having symptoms, it's probably nothing," she interrupted. I'm 52 years old, and I've been working 2 jobs for 4 years. I'm allowed to be tired. But there was something in her eyes that scared me, a flicker of worry she was trying to hide. The appointment was on a Tuesday. I skipped class to go with her, something I never did, and sat in the waiting room of her primary care physician while she went in for her exam. When she came out, she was smiling. See? Nothing. He said I'm probably just stressed and need to take better care of myself. He gave me some vitamins and told me to get more sleep. I wanted to believe her. But 2 months later, she collapsed in her classroom. The call came while I was in the middle of a clinical shift. Mrs. Patterson, frantic, saying the ambulance had taken Grace to Grady Memorial, that I needed to come now. I found her in the emergency room, hooked up to monitors, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Mama," I breathed, taking her hand. "I'm okay." "Baby," she said, but her voice was weak. "Just got a little dizzy." The ER doctor pulled me aside an hour later. "We're running tests," he said. "Her blood pressure is elevated, and we're seeing some irregularities in her EKG. We want to keep her overnight for observation." Overnight turned into 3 days. 3 days turned into a diagnosis. Hypertension, dangerously high, probably caused by years of stress and overwork. "She needs to slow down," the cardiologist said. "Reduce her stress levels, change her diet, take medication consistently. Otherwise, she's at serious risk for a heart attack or stroke." I looked at my mother, lying in that hospital bed, and felt the weight of every sacrifice she'd made crash down on me. She'd worked herself sick keeping us afloat, and I was the reason. "Mama," I said when we were alone, "you need to quit the diner." "I can't afford to quit," she said. "Then I'll quit school." "Absolutely not." Her voice was sharp, stronger than it had been in days. "You're 8 months away from graduating, Ava. 8 months. You're not quitting anything. But no buts." She squeezed my hand. "I've already talked to Mrs. Patterson. She's going to help watch Malik a couple extra days a week, and I'm going to cut back my hours at the diner. We'll make it work. You always say that, because it's always true." She smiled. "We've made it this far, haven't we?" I graduated nursing school in May, 6 months after my mother's hospitalization. Malik was 5 years old, sitting in the front row with my mother, holding a sign that said, "My mama is a nurse," in crayon. When they called my name, Ava Grace Robinson, Bachelor of Science in Nursing, I walked across that stage with my head high and tears streaming down my face. I'd done it. Against every odd, every obstacle, every person who'd written me off as a statistic, I'd done it. I found Malik and my mother in the crowd afterward. Malik launched himself into my arms, and my mother hugged us both, whispering in my ear, "I told you this was just the beginning." She was right. It was. I got my first real nursing job 2 weeks after graduation, pediatric oncology at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. The pay was better than anything I'd ever imagined, and the work was exactly where I was meant to be. My first paycheck felt like a miracle. $2,300 after taxes, more money than I'd ever held in my hands at one time. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, staring at that direct deposit notification on my phone, and cried. Not sad tears, relief tears. The kind that come when you realize you might actually make it, that survival might turn into something more than just getting by. The first thing I did was take my mother to the doctor and pay out of pocket for a full cardiac workup. The second thing was move us out of that basement apartment. We found a 2-bedroom townhouse in College Park. Nothing fancy, but it had a yard where Malik could play and a second bathroom so my mother and I weren't fighting over shower time in the mornings. It had a dishwasher and central air conditioning and windows that let in actual sunlight. The day we moved in, Malik ran through the empty rooms, his voice echoing off the walls, shouting, "This is my room. This is Gamma's room. This is Mama's room," like he was claiming territory. My mother stood in the kitchen, a real kitchen with a full-size refrigerator and a stove that had all 4 burners working, and I watched her shoulders shake. "Mama?" I touched her arm gently. She turned to me, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "We did it, baby," she whispered. "We actually did it." I hugged her tight, this woman who'd given up everything so I could have something. "No, Mama, you did it. I just tried to keep up." She pulled back and cupped my face in her hands, the way she'd done since I was little. Don't you dare diminish what you've accomplished. You were 17, pregnant, and homeless. Now look at you. College degree, career, a home. You did that, Ava. You. I wanted to argue, but Malik came barreling into the kitchen, grabbing both our hands. Come see my room. I can see the park from my window. We let him pull us upstairs, and I caught my mother's eye over his head. She was right. We'd both done this. Together. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. A better rhythm. I worked 3 12-hour shifts a week, which meant I had 4 days home with Malik. My mother finally quit the diner and focused on just teaching, which took immediate pressure off her health. Her blood pressure stabilized with medication and less stress, and color returned to her face. Color I hadn't realized she'd lost. Malik thrived. Kindergarten turned into first grade, and his teacher, Ms. Washington, pulled me aside during parent-teacher conferences. Mrs. Robinson. Ms., I corrected gently. Ms. Robinson. Ms. Robinson. She smiled apologetically. I wanted to talk to you about Malik. He's a bright child, reading above grade level, excellent with math. But what really stands out is his empathy. He's the first child to notice when another student is struggling or upset. He's a natural leader. Pride swelled in my chest. Thank you. That means a lot. I also wanted to mention, she hesitated. He did a family tree project last week. He drew himself, you, and his grandmother. When I asked about his father, he said he doesn't have one. Is that accurate? My stomach tightened. His father isn't involved, no. And his grandfather? Also not involved. She nodded slowly. I only ask because some of the other children were asking questions, and I wanted to make sure Malik has the support he needs to navigate those conversations. I thought about my own father then, Charles Robinson, who'd been absent from my life for 7 years, who'd never met his grandson, who probably still preached about family values every Sunday to a congregation that didn't know he'd abandoned his own daughter. He has all the support he needs, I said firmly. He has me, and he has his grandmother, and he has a community that loves him. That's more than enough, Ms. Washington smiled. I can see that. He's a lucky boy. Lucky. I turned that word over in my mind as I drove home. Was Malik lucky? He had a mother who loved him fiercely, and a grandmother who'd sacrificed everything for us. But he also had a father who sent child support checks, when he remembered, but never called, never visited, never showed up to school events or birthdays. He had a grandfather who didn't know he existed. That night, after Malik was asleep, I sat on the porch with my mother, watching the sun set over College Park. Ms. Washington asked about Malik's father today, I said, and his grandfather. My mother sipped her tea. What did you tell her? That they're not involved. That he has everything he needs. And do you believe that? I was quiet for a moment. Most days, but sometimes I worry that I'm not enough. That he needs a father figure, a male role model, someone who can teach him things I can't. Like what? I don't know. How to be a man, I guess. My mother set down her tea and turned to face me. Ava, you know what teaches a boy how to be a man? Watching how the people around him treat others. Watching work ethic and integrity and compassion. Malik sees you get up every day and go to a job where you help sick children. He sees me volunteer at church and tutor struggling students after school. He sees Mrs. Patterson bring meals to the elderly neighbors on our street. But it's not the same. It's better, she interrupted, because he's learning that being a good person isn't about gender. It's about character. Your father had the title of man, husband, and pastor, but he didn't have the character to match. Marcus had the biology to be a father, but not the commitment. Malik doesn't need men who share his DNA. He needs people who show up. And you, baby, have been showing up every single day since the moment you found out you were pregnant. I let her words settle over me like a blanket. She was right. She was always right. When Malik was 8, something shifted. He joined the Youth Football League, East Point Eagles, ages 8 to 10, and discovered he was good. Really good. I'll never forget his first game. He was so small compared to the other boys, and I stood on the sidelines with my heart in my throat, terrified he'd get hurt. But the moment that ball was in his hands, something clicked. He was fast, faster than anyone expected, and he had this instinct for finding gaps in the defense that even the coaches couldn't explain. Where'd he get that from? Angela asked, standing beside me with Zara, who was now playing soccer in the league next door. No idea, I laughed. Definitely not from me. I can't even run a mile without feeling like I'm dying. But watching Malik play, watching the pure joy on his face as he scored his first touchdown, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not just for survival, but for something more. For a future that looked different than the path I'd imagined for him. The coach, a man named Raymond Brooks, pulled me aside after the game. "Your son's special," he said. "I've been coaching youth football for 15 years, and I can count on one hand the number of kids who have his combination of speed, instinct, and coachability. He listens, he works hard, and he makes everyone around him better." "Thank you," I said, pride making my voice thick. "He really loves it. I can tell. And I want to work with him, really work with him, if you're open to it. Extra training sessions, one-on-one coaching, no charge, I see something in him, and I don't want it to go to waste." I studied Coach Brooks. He was in his mid-40s, black, with kind eyes and a wedding ring. He reminded me of the men my mother had told me about, the ones who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to make a difference. "Why would you do that for free?" I asked. He smiled. "Because someone did it for me when I was his age. I played for the NFL for 6 years before a knee injury ended my career. But the reason I made it there was because a coach saw something in me and invested time I couldn't pay for. I'm just passing it forward." "Then yes," I said. "Thank you." That would mean the world to him. Coach Brooks became the male figure I didn't know Malik needed. He showed up to every practice, every game. He taught Malik about discipline and teamwork and how to lose with grace. He took him to local high school games, explaining plays and strategy. And more importantly, he treated Malik like he mattered, not as charity, but as someone worth investing in. My mother watched this unfold with quiet satisfaction. "God provides," she'd say. Maybe not always the way we expect, but he provides. By the time Malik was 10, he was the starting quarterback for his team. By 12, he was being watched by coaches from competitive middle school programs. By 14, high school recruiters were showing up to his games, taking notes, making promises. "This is getting serious," I told my mother one night after another coach had approached us with a business card and talk of athletic development programs. "It's always been serious," she said. "We're just now seeing what you've been building. You raised a boy who works hard, stays humble, and treats people right. The football is just the vehicle. The character is what matters." Malik got a full scholarship to North Springs High School, a charter school with one of the best football programs in Georgia. He was 15 years old, 6'1", and already fielding interest from college scouts. I watched my baby boy, who used to fit in the crook of my arm, put on that North Springs jersey for his first game, and I couldn't breathe. "You okay, Mama?" he asked, catching my expression. "I'm proud of you, baby," I said, fixing his collar even though it didn't need fixing. So proud. "I wouldn't be here without you," he said, and his voice cracked a little. 15, and caught between boy and man. "You and Gamma. Everything I do is because of you." I hugged him then, not caring that he was in his uniform and I was wrinkling it. "You're going to do great things, Malik Robinson," I whispered. "Not because of football, but because of who you are." He played varsity all 4 years. By his junior year, he was the starting quarterback, leading North Springs to the state championship. By senior year, he was ranked as one of the top quarterback prospects in the nation. College offers poured in. Alabama, Clemson, LSU, Florida, Ohio State. But when he sat down at our kitchen table with stacks of recruitment letters, he looked at me and my mother and said, "I want to stay close to home. I want to go to the University of Georgia." "Baby, you can go anywhere," I said. "You've earned that." "I know," he said. "But Gamma's not getting any younger." My mother swatted his arm playfully. "And you've sacrificed everything to get me here. I want to be close enough that you can come to my games, that I can come home for Sunday dinners, that I don't miss anything." I looked at my mother, and she had tears in her eyes. "You sure?" I asked Malik. He nodded. "I'm sure. Besides, UGA is a great program." It's where I want to be. He committed to the University of Georgia on a full athletic scholarship in November of his senior year. The local news covered it. Ava Robinson, North Springs quarterback, commits to UGA. His name was in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, on local sports radio, on recruiting websites that ranked him as a 4-star prospect with potential for the NFL. The name Robinson, the name my father had tried to erase, was everywhere, and it meant something now. It meant excellence, hard work, overcoming odds. I wondered if my father saw those headlines, if he knew, and if he did, if it kept him up at night. My mother's health declined during Malik's senior year of high school. It was small things at first. More fatigue, shortness of breath, a cough that wouldn't go away. I made her go to the doctor, and they ran tests, then more tests, then referred her to a cardiologist. Her heart is weaker than we'd like, the cardiologist explained. The years of hypertension did more damage than we initially thought. She's going to need to be careful. No stress, regular medication, lifestyle changes. I'll be fine, my mother insisted. I've been fine for 20 years. I'll be fine for 20 more. But I saw the worry in her eyes. The way she'd pause at the top of the stairs to catch her breath. The way she'd go to bed earlier and earlier each night. I started working fewer shifts, spending more time at home, watching her in ways she pretended not to notice. Malik noticed too. He'd come home from practice and immediately check on his grandmother, help her with dinner, insist on carrying anything heavier than a bag of rice. I'm not made of glass, she'd protest, but she'd smile when he kissed her forehead. We made it through Malik's graduation, my mother sitting in the front row, beaming as her grandson walked across that stage. We made it through his 18th birthday, through the summer before he left for college, and then, in August 2020, just before Malik's first semester at UGA, the world shut down. COVID-19 hit Georgia like a freight train, and my mother, with her weakened heart and underlying conditions, was in the highest risk category. We locked down completely. No visitors, groceries delivered. I took a leave of absence from the hospital. I couldn't risk bringing the virus home to her. Malik's first semester was online, which meant he stayed home too. We were grateful for that. Grateful for the extra time, the family dinners, the evenings on the porch watching the sunset. But in November, despite every precaution, my mother got sick. My mother died on November 18th, 2020, in the ICU at Grady Memorial Hospital, the same hospital where she'd held my hand through labor, where I'd graduated nursing school, where I'd learned what it meant to care for people at their most vulnerable. I wasn't allowed in the room when she took her last breath. COVID protocols meant only one visitor at a time, and Malik had been in there with her that morning. By the time they called me to say she was declining rapidly, by the time I'd run through those corridors I knew by heart, she was already gone. I stood outside her room in full PPE, gown, gloves, N95 mask, face shield, staring through the glass at my mother's body, and the only thought in my head was, she died alone. That's not true. The nurse, a young woman I'd worked with before the pandemic, said gently, your son was here. She wasn't alone, but it felt like she was. It felt like we all were. They let me in after, let me sit with her body for 30 minutes. I held her hand, still warm, not yet gone completely, and I told her everything I hadn't said enough while she was alive. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for leaving him. Thank you for every sacrifice, every late night, every moment you put my needs above your own. Thank you for showing me what love actually looks like. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. The funeral was small. 10 people maximum, masks required, 6 feet apart. It felt wrong, burying my mother with so few witnesses to her life. She'd taught hundreds of students, touched countless lives, deserved a church full of people singing her home. Instead, it was me, Malik, Angela, and Keisha, Mrs. Patterson, a handful of my mother's teacher friends, and a pastor neither of us knew because our old church, my father's church, was off limits. Malik gave the eulogy. He was 18 years old, 6'2", wearing a suit that made him look more man than boy. And when he stood at that podium, his voice didn't shake. My grandmother, Grace Robinson, was the strongest person I ever knew, he said. Not because she was loud or demanding or forced her way through the world, but because she was steady, because she showed up every single day for my mama, for me, for her students, for anyone who needed her. He paused, and I saw his jaw clench the way it did when he was fighting tears. She taught me that love isn't about what you say. It's about what you do, and she did everything. She gave up her marriage to protect my mama. She worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. She came to every single one of my football games, even when she was tired, even when it was cold, even when her health was failing. His voice cracked. I wouldn't be the man I am without her. And I promise, he looked directly at me, I promise to make her proud, to live the kind of life that honors what she built. I couldn't hold it together after that. I sobbed into Angela's shoulder while they lowered my mother into the ground. This woman who'd saved me in every way a person can be saved. The weeks after were a blur of grief and paperwork and emptiness. The townhouse felt too big without her. Her reading glasses were still on the coffee table. Her coffee mug, the one that said "World's Best Gamma," was still in the dish drainer. Her Bible was bookmarked at Proverbs 31, verses about a woman of valor, and I couldn't bring myself to move it. Malik started in-person classes at UGA in January 2021, and I could see the relief in his eyes. The need to escape the house that felt like a mausoleum. To throw himself into football and school and anything that wasn't grief. I went back to work at the hospital, back to 12-hour shifts, back to caring for other people's children because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And I tried not to think about the fact that I was alone now. Truly alone. No mother, no father, no partner. Just me and the ghost of everyone I'd lost. It was Angela who made me start therapy. "You can't keep doing this," she said one night in March, sitting across from me in my living room while I pretended to eat the dinner she'd brought. "You're going through the motions, but you're not living." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "You're not fine. You lost your mother. You're allowed to not be fine." "I don't have time to not be fine. I have bills to pay, a son in college, a job, and none of that matters if you fall apart," she interrupted. "Please, Ava, just try. Talk to someone." So I did. Dr. Michelle Harris, a black woman in her 50s who'd lost her own mother to COVID and understood grief in a way that felt less clinical and more human, became my therapist. "Tell me about your mother," she said in our first session. I told her everything. The night we left, the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the love that held us together when everything else fell apart. "She sounds remarkable," Dr. Harris said. She was. "And your father. You've mentioned him briefly, but tell me more about that relationship." I hadn't talked about my father in years. Hadn't let myself think about him beyond the occasional bitter thought that he'd missed everything. Malik's birth, my graduation, all the moments that mattered. "There's nothing to tell," I said. "He kicked me out when I was 17. I haven't seen or spoken to him since. That must be painful." It was. It's not anymore, isn't it? Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly. "Because from what you've told me, you've built an incredible life. Nursing career, raised a son who's thriving, overcame obstacles that would have broken most people. And yet you still carry this belief that you're not enough, that you have to prove yourself. Why do you think that is?" I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. "Could it be," she continued gently, "that you're still trying to prove to your father that he was wrong about you?" The words hit like a punch to the chest. "He doesn't deserve my thoughts," I said, my voice sharp. "I'm not saying he does. I'm saying that sometimes the people who hurt us the most still have the loudest voices in our heads. And healing means turning down that volume so you can hear your own voice. The one that knows your worth isn't dependent on his approval." I cried in that office. Ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. Because she was right. Even after everything. After building a life, raising a son, becoming someone my father could never diminish, I was still that 17-year-old girl on her knees, begging him not to send her away. "How do I stop?" I asked when I could speak again. "You start by forgiving him," Dr. Harris said. "Not because he deserves it, but because you deserve peace, forgiveness." The word my mother had used for years, the concept she'd tried to model even when I was too angry to understand. I don't know if I can, I admitted. That's okay. Forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a journey, and you don't have to walk it alone. I left that session feeling lighter than I had in months. Not healed, not even close, but like maybe, eventually, I could be. Malik's first season at UGA was everything we'd hoped for. He redshirted his freshman year, which meant he practiced with the team but didn't play in games, standard for quarterbacks at major programs. But he was learning, developing, earning respect from coaches and teammates. His sophomore year, he became the backup quarterback. His junior year, the starter graduated and Malik took the reins. And my God, he was brilliant. I went to every home game, driving the hour to Athens, sitting in the family section wearing my red and black, watching my son lead the Georgia Bulldogs with the same determination he'd brought to everything else in his life. The announcers knew his name. Ava Robinson drops back, finds his receiver in the end zone. Touchdown, Georgia. The fans chanted it. Robinson! Robinson! Local media interviewed him. How does it feel to be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC? It feels like responsibility, he'd say. I'm representing my family, my teammates, my university. I don't take that lightly. He was humble, gracious, exactly who my mother raised him to be. After one particularly big win, a comeback victory against Florida, where Malik had thrown 4 touchdowns, I met him outside the locker room. He was still in his uniform, sweat-soaked and grinning, and he picked me up in a hug that lifted me off my feet. Did you see that last throw? He asked, eyes bright with adrenaline. I saw everything, baby. You were amazing. He set me down, and his expression shifted, became more serious. I wish Gamma could have seen this, he said quietly. She did, I said, touching his cheek. I promise you, she saw every second. We stood there in the corridor outside the Georgia locker room, surrounded by celebrating fans and media, and had a moment of silence for the woman who'd made all of this possible. It was late October 2023, Malik's junior year, my 34th birthday, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Probably spam, I thought, but something made me pick up. Hello? Ava? The voice was old, rough, unfamiliar, and yet somehow achingly familiar. My stomach dropped. Who is this? A long pause. Then, it's your father. The world tilted. I sat down on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, and couldn't form words. Ava, are you there? Why are you calling me? My voice came out cold, detached. He cleared his throat. I've been trying to find the courage to call for years. And then I saw your son, Malik, on television. Saw his name, Robinson. Saw an interview where he mentioned his mother, a nurse named Ava. And I knew. You knew what? That I'd missed everything. That I'd thrown away the most important people in my life for pride, for reputation, for nothing that actually mattered. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You're 7 years too late. My mother's dead. She died in 2020 and you weren't there. You didn't get to say goodbye. You didn't get to see what she built from the wreckage you created. I know, his voice broke. I know, and I've been living with that every day. Ava, I'm sick. Stage 4 heart failure. The doctors say I have maybe 6 months, maybe less. And I can't die without trying to make this right. There is no making this right, I said, anger rising like bile in my throat. You can't apologize your way out of 20 years of abandonment. I'm not trying to. He took a shaky breath. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to see me. Once. Let me meet my grandson. Let me try to explain. Explain what? How you chose your reputation over your daughter. How you let my mother sacrifice everything while you played pastor to people who thought you were righteous. There's nothing to explain, Charles. I used his name deliberately. Not dad, not father. Just his name. He was quiet for a long moment. You're right, he said finally. You're absolutely right. But I'm asking anyway. Please, Ava, give me one chance. I should have said no. Should have hung up. Should have protected myself the way he never protected me. But I heard Dr. Harris's voice. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about putting down the weight you've been carrying. and I heard my mother's voice. The forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it changes what you carry in your heart. I'll think about it, I said. Thank you, he whispered. That's more than I deserve. I hung up and sat in silence for an hour, staring at nothing, feeling everything. My father, the man who'd erased me from his life, wanted back in, and I had no idea what to do about it. I didn't tell Malik about the phone call right away. For 2 weeks I carried it alone. This weight of my father's voice, his request, his dying wish. I'd go to work, come home, make dinner, and pretend everything was normal while my mind replayed that conversation on an endless loop. Stage 4 heart failure, maybe 6 months. Part of me felt vindicated. Poetic justice, even. The man who'd broken my mother's heart was dying from his own failing heart. But there was another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, that felt something else entirely. Grief. For what could have been. For what never was. I finally called Dr. Harris. He wants to meet, I told her. After 20 years of silence, he's dying and wants to meet his grandson. How does that make you feel? She asked. I laughed without humor. Isn't that the cliché therapist question? It's cliché because it works. So how does it make you feel? I was quiet, searching for the right words. Angry, resentful, like he doesn't get to waltz back in now that it's convenient for him, now that he's seen Malik's success and wants a piece of it. Those are valid feelings. But? I heard the unspoken word. But nothing, Dr. Harris said. Those feelings are completely valid. The question is, what do you want to do about them? Not what you think you should do, not what your mother would have done. What do you want? I closed my eyes. I don't know. Then take your time figuring it out. There's no deadline here. He's dying. That's his timeline, not yours. You don't owe him closure, Ava. If you decide to see him, it needs to be because you want to. Because it serves your healing, not because he's running out of time. I sat with that for days. And then I talked to Malik. He came home for Thanksgiving weekend. His season was over. Georgia had made the SEC championship, and he had a week off before final exams. We were in the kitchen, making my mother's sweet potato pie recipe, when I finally found the courage. Your grandfather called me, I said, measuring out cinnamon with hands that weren't quite steady. Malik stopped mid-stir. My grandfather? My father. Your biological grandfather, Charles Robinson. He set down the bowl. The one who kicked you out? Yeah, that one. What did he want? I told him everything. The call, the diagnosis, the request to meet. Malik was quiet for a long time, his jaw working the way it did when he was processing something difficult. Do you want to see him? He asked finally. I don't know. Part of me wants to tell him to go to hell. But another part. I trailed off, struggling to articulate the complexity of it. Another part wants closure, Malik finished. Wants to understand why. I looked at my son, this young man who was wise beyond his years, and nodded. What do you want? I asked. If I decide to see him, do you want to meet him? Malik thought about it. Really thought about it. His hands braced on the counter. I don't need him, he said slowly. I've never needed him. I had Gamma and I have you, and that's been more than enough. But he looked at me with those eyes that saw too much. If you need to do this, if you need to hear whatever he has to say, then I'll be there. Not for him. For you? I hugged him then, this boy who'd grown into a man I was proud of beyond measure. When did you get so smart? I asked, my voice muffled against his shoulder. I learned from the best, he said simply. I called my father back the next day. I'll meet you, I said without preamble. Once, at a neutral location, and Malik will be there. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you, Ava. When? Next Saturday. 2:00. There's a park near Stone Mountain. We'll meet there. I'll be there. And Charles? I used his name again, claiming distance. Don't expect forgiveness. Don't expect reconciliation. I'm doing this for me, not for you. I understand. I hung up before he could say anything else. The week leading up to that meeting was torture. I went through every possible scenario in my mind. What I'd say, what he'd say, how it would feel to see him after 2 decades. Would he look the same? Would I recognize him? Would he recognize me? Angela came over the night before, bringing wine and moral support. "You don't have to do this," she said, sitting cross-legged on my couch. "You know that, right? You can change your mind. I know. So why are you doing it?" I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the light catch the deep red color. Because my mother spent 20 years telling me that forgiveness was freedom. That holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I didn't understand it then. I was too angry, too hurt. But now, I paused. Now I'm tired of carrying this weight, and I think the only way to put it down is to face him. "That's brave," Angela said softly. "Or stupid. Sometimes they're the same thing." Saturday came too quickly and not quickly enough. Malik drove us to the park, his hand steady on the wheel, his presence a quiet source of strength. We arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the parking lot, watching families play on the playground, couples walk their dogs, people living normal lives while mine felt like it was about to split open. "You ready?" Malik asked. "No, but let's go anyway." We walked to the pavilion I'd specified, a covered area with picnic tables, public enough to feel safe, private enough to have a conversation. My father was already there. I saw him before he saw me, and the sight of him stole my breath. He looked old, ancient. Nothing like the towering, imposing figure who dominated my childhood. He was sitting at a picnic table, shoulders hunched, and even from a distance I could see how thin he'd become. How frail. He looked up as we approached, and his face, God. His face crumpled. "Ava," he whispered, standing slowly, leaning heavily on a cane I hadn't noticed. I stopped about 10 feet away, keeping that distance intentional. Malik stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. My father's eyes moved to him, and I watched recognition dawn. Watched him see the grandson he'd never known, 6'2", broad-shouldered, wearing a University of Georgia hoodie. "This is Malik," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. "Your grandson." "Malik." My father's voice broke on the name. "My God, boy, you look just like my father." "Your great-grandfather." Malik didn't respond, just stood there, solid and protective. We sat down at the picnic table, me and Malik on one side, my father on the other. The distance felt deliberate, necessary. "Thank you for coming," my father started. "I know you didn't have to." "No, I didn't," I agreed. "So let's not waste time with pleasantries. You said you wanted to explain, so explain." He nodded, accepting the coldness in my tone like he deserved it, which he did. "When you told me you were pregnant," he began, "I felt like my world was ending. Not because of you, though it took me 20 years to realize that, but because of me. Because I'd built my entire identity on being Pastor Charles Robinson, the man who had it all together, the man whose family was perfect, whose daughter was perfect, whose life was a testament to godly living." He paused, hands shaking on the table. "And when you told me you were pregnant, it shattered that illusion. Not for anyone else, but for me. I couldn't reconcile the daughter I'd raised with the situation you were in, so I did what cowards do. I blamed you instead of examining myself." "You didn't just blame me," I said, anger seeping through the cracks. "You erased me. You threw me away like I was nothing." "I know." Tears streamed down his weathered face. "I know, Ava, and I've regretted it every single day since. I watched you and your mother walk away, and I told myself I'd done the right thing, that I was maintaining standards, upholding righteousness. But the truth was I was just too proud to admit I was wrong. And my mother?" My voice rose. "She gave up everything for me. Her marriage, her home, her community. She worked herself to death keeping us afloat." "Where were you?" "I was a coward," he said simply. "I was a proud, stubborn coward who convinced himself that being right was more important than being loving. And by the time I realized what I'd lost, I didn't know how to fix it. Years turned into decades, and the shame of what I'd done became this insurmountable wall." "You could have reached out," I said, "at any point. When Malik was born, when I graduated nursing school, when Mama got sick, you could have been there." "I tried," he said quietly. "I'd dial your mother's number and hang up before it rang. I'd drive to your old address and sit in the car, too afraid to knock. I'd see updates about Malik in the news and want to call. Want to congratulate you, but the guilt—" His voice broke. The guilt was suffocating. Malik spoke for the first time. "That's not an excuse." My father looked at him, fresh tears falling. "You're right. It's not. There is no excuse for what I did. No justification. I failed as a father, as a husband, as a man of God, and I've spent every day since living with that failure. Why now?" I asked. "Why, after all this time, are you finally here?" "Because I'm dying," he said bluntly. And I realized that I'd spent my whole life caring about what people thought of me. And in the process, I lost the only people who actually mattered. I lost your mother. God rest her soul, I lost her twice. Once when she walked out that door, and again when COVID took her and I couldn't even go to her funeral. "You knew she died?" I asked, surprised. "I knew. Mrs. Patterson called me. Told me I'd lost the best woman I'd ever know, and that I'd done it to myself." He smiled sadly. She was right. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 20 years pressing down on us. "I'm not here asking for your forgiveness," my father continued. "I don't deserve it. I'm not even asking for a relationship, though God knows I want one. I'm here because I needed you to know." His voice shook. "I needed you to know that you were never the problem. That you were always enough. That every single thing I said to you that night was wrong. And I'm sorry. I'm so profoundly sorry." I felt tears on my cheeks and realized I was crying. Not from sadness exactly. From release maybe. From hearing words I'd needed for 20 years. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't being homeless or raising Malik alone, or working 3 jobs to get through nursing school. It was believing that I'd disappointed you so badly that I wasn't worth loving anymore. That's what broke me. Thinking that your love was conditional, and I'd failed the conditions." "Oh, Ava." He reached across the table like he might touch my hand, then thought better of it. "My love should never have been conditional. And the fact that you thought it was, that's my failure, not yours. You were 17 and scared and human. And instead of protecting you, I abandoned you." Malik's hand tightened on my shoulder, grounding me. "I can't undo the past," my father said. "I can't give you back those years or erase the pain I caused. But I can tell you that watching you succeed, watching you raise this remarkable young man, watching you build a career and a life that would make anyone proud, has been my only comfort. You did everything I was too cowardly to believe you could." I looked at this old, dying man, this stranger who used to be my father, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "Not today. Maybe not ever, but I can tell you that I'm trying. For my own peace, not for yours. Because my mother spent her last years telling me that forgiveness was the key to freedom, and I think she was right. Grace was always right," he said with a broken smile. "About everything." We talked for another hour, carefully, tentatively. He asked about my work, about Malik's football career, about our lives. I answered, keeping details surface level, maintaining boundaries. Malik mostly listened, watching this grandfather he'd never known with a mixture of curiosity and protectiveness. As we stood to leave, my father looked at Malik one more time. "I don't have the right to be proud of you," he said, "but I am. Your mother raised you well, better than I ever could have. You're everything a grandfather could hope for, and I'm sorry I missed the chance to be part of it." Malik nodded once. "Thank you for apologizing to my mother. She deserved that." We walked back to the car in silence. I felt wrung out, exhausted, but also somehow lighter. "How are you feeling?" Malik asked as we drove home. "I don't know," I admitted. "Like I just climbed a mountain I didn't know I could climb." "Are you going to see him again?" I thought about it. Maybe, if he has time left. Not because I owe him anything, but because... I struggled to find the words. Because I think Mama would want me to. She always said that forgiveness wasn't about the other person. It was about freeing yourself from the prison of anger. Malik reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're the strongest person I..." "No," he said quietly. "I learned from your grandmother," I replied. And for the first time in 20 years, when I thought about my father, The rage felt a little less consuming. Maybe that was the beginning of healing. Maybe that was enough. I saw my father 3 more times before he died. The first time was 2 weeks after our initial meeting. He called and asked if I'd be willing to come to his house. The house I'd grown up in. The house I'd been thrown out of 20 years earlier. I almost said no. The thought of stepping back into that space felt like voluntarily walking into a nightmare, but Dr. Harris encouraged me to consider it. Sometimes, she said, we need to face our ghosts in the places they haunt us, not to give them power, but to take it back. So I went, alone this time. Malik had practice, and honestly, I needed to do this by myself. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was fading, the garden overgrown. A for sale sign stood in the front yard, slightly tilted, like even it was tired of waiting. My father answered the door on the second knock, moving slowly, oxygen tank trailing behind him like a shadow. You came, he said, relief evident in his voice. I said I would. He led me inside, and I was struck by how empty it felt. Most of the furniture was gone, sold or donated, I assumed. The walls were bare where family photos used to hang. It looked less like a home and more like a stage being dismantled after the final performance. I'm selling it, he explained, following my gaze. Moving into hospice care next month. Can't maintain this place anymore, and... He trailed off. There are too many ghosts here anyway. We sat in the living room, him in the only remaining armchair, me on a folding chair he'd set up for the occasion. The awkwardness was palpable. Why did you want me to come here? I asked. He reached beside his chair and pulled out a box. Old, worn cardboard held together with packing tape. I wanted to give you this, he said, setting it on the coffee table between us. After your mother left, I couldn't bring myself to throw away anything that reminded me of you two, so I kept it all. Pictures, report cards, awards, Christmas ornaments you made in Sunday school, everything. I stared at the box like it might bite me. I don't understand. You kicked me out, but you kept my stuff? I know how it sounds, he said quietly. Hypocritical, cowardly. Both of those things are true. But the truth is, Ava, I never stopped loving you. I just stopped knowing how to show it, and I was too ashamed to try. I opened the box with shaking hands. On top was a photo I remembered. Me at age 7, missing my 2 front teeth, holding up a spelling bee trophy. Beneath that, a Mother's Day card I'd made in 4th grade. My high school diploma, the one I'd never gotten because I'd dropped out. Apparently, the school had sent it to my parents' address anyway. There were birthday cards my mother had sent over the years, returned unopened. Every single one, saved in chronological order. You never opened them? I asked, holding up a card postmarked for my 21st birthday. I couldn't, he admitted. Opening them would have meant acknowledging what I'd lost. And I wasn't strong enough to do that. I kept digging, found photos of my mother, young, smiling, in love with a man who didn't exist anymore. Found a newspaper clipping about Malik's recruitment to UGA, carefully cut out and saved. You've been following his career? I asked. Every game I could watch, every article I could find. I've never missed a single one of his games that was televised. He smiled sadly. He's extraordinary, Ava, just like you. I didn't know how to feel about that. This man had abandoned us but watched from afar, close enough to observe, too far to matter. Why are you giving this to me now? I asked. Because it's yours. It always was. And because I wanted you to know that even when I was at my worst, even when I was too proud and stubborn to reach out, you were never forgotten. You were always here. He pressed his hand to his chest, even when I tried to pretend you weren't. I took the box home that day. Spent the evening going through it with Malik, showing him pieces of a past he'd never known, a grandmother who was young and vibrant, a mother who was innocent and hopeful, a family that existed before it shattered. It's weird, Malik said, holding a photo of me in my high school choir uniform. Seeing you before everything happened. You look happy. I was, I said. I didn't know any different yet. Do you think you'll ever be that happy again? I looked at my son, this young man who'd given my life purpose when I thought it had none, and smiled. I'm happy now, baby. Different than that, but better maybe, because this happiness, the one I have now, I built it myself. Nobody gave it to me. Nobody can take it away. The second visit to my father's house was in early December. He called and asked if Malik and I would come for dinner. Nothing fancy, just takeout, but he wanted to share a meal with us. One meal before it was too late. Malik hesitated when I asked him. I don't know, Mama. What's the point? He's dying and we barely know him. Isn't it just going to be painful? Probably, I admitted. But I think your grandmother would want us to go. She always believed in giving people grace, even when they didn't deserve it. So we went. My father had ordered from Pascal's, a soul food institution in Atlanta, and the smell of fried chicken and collard greens filled the nearly empty house. He'd set up a card table in the dining room, complete with paper plates and plastic forks. Not exactly fancy, he apologized. It's perfect, I said, and meant it. We ate slowly, conversation coming in fits and starts. My father asked Malik about football, about the SEC championship coming up, about his plans for the NFL draft. I'm declaring after my senior year, Malik said. If everything goes well. It will, my father said with certainty. You have a gift, son. Don't waste it. I won't. My mama taught me better than that. My father's eyes filled with tears. She did. She taught you everything I should have. After dinner, my father pulled out another box. Smaller this time. This is for you, Malik, he said, sliding it across the table. It belonged to my father, your great-grandfather, Samuel Robinson. He played football, too, back in the 50s. Never went pro, but he loved the game. I want you to have this. Malik opened the box carefully. Inside was a watch. Old, worn, but clearly cherished. He gave this to me before he died, my father explained. Told me to pass it down to my son. I never had a son, but... He looked at Malik with something like wonder. I have a grandson, and that's close enough. Malik turned the watch over in his hands, reading the inscription on the back. Time is the only thing we can't get back. Use it wisely. Sar, thank you, Malik said quietly. I'll take care of it. I know you will. We stayed for another hour, and for the first time, the conversation felt less strained. My father told stories about his own father, about growing up in Atlanta during segregation, about dreams he'd had and mistakes he'd made. He was human, flawed and broken and real in a way he'd never allowed himself to be when I was growing up. As we were leaving, he hugged me. Actually hugged me, the first physical contact we'd had in 20 years. Thank you for giving me this, he whispered. I know I don't deserve it. Maybe not, I said, pulling back to look at him. But maybe that's what grace is, giving people what they don't deserve because it sets you free. He smiled through tears. Your mother said something similar once. About me, I think. She was a wise woman, the wisest, and I was a fool for letting her go. The third and final visit wasn't planned. It was January 12th, 2024, 11 days after. Georgia won the national championship with Malik as their starting quarterback. 11 days after my son's name became known across the country. 11 days after we'd celebrated at midfield while confetti rained down and I'd cried watching my baby achieve something I'd once thought impossible. The call came at 3 a.m. Hospice. My father was declining rapidly. If I wanted to say goodbye, I needed to come now. I drove through empty Atlanta streets, Malik dozing in the passenger seat, both of us exhausted, but awake in the way that grief demands. The hospice facility was quiet, sterile, a place where people came to die with dignity. They led us to his room. Small, dimly lit, smelling of antiseptic and inevitability. My father was barely conscious. His breathing labored even with the oxygen, but when I took his hand, his eyes opened. Ava, he breathed. I'm here, Charles. I'm here. Malik? I'm here too, sir, Malik said, standing at the foot of the bed. My father smiled, a real smile, maybe the most genuine I'd ever seen from him. I saw the game, he managed between labored breaths. You were magnificent. Thank you, your grandmother. Would be so proud. I know, Malik said, his voice thick. I played for her. My father's eyes moved to me. Ava, I need tell you. You don't have to say anything, I said. Just rest. No. Need to. He squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. I'm proud of you, always was, even when too proud to say it. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I forgive you, I whispered, and realized I meant it, not because he'd earned it, but because holding on to anger had become heavier than letting it go. I forgive you, Daddy. Daddy. The word I hadn't used in 20 years. His face crumpled, tears streaming down weathered cheeks. Thank you, he choked out. Tell your mother. I'm sorry. Tell her. She was right. About everything, I will. Take care of each other. His eyes moved between me and Malik. Family is all that matters. Took me too long to learn that. His breathing became more shallow, more labored. The nurse came in, checked his vitals, gave me a knowing look. It wouldn't be long now. I held his hand. This man who'd hurt me, abandoned me, but who'd also given me life and, in his broken way, taught me what not to be. I held his hand and I sang. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. My mother's favorite hymn, the one she'd sung to Malik as a baby, the one that had carried us through every impossible moment. Malik joined in, his voice strong and steady. That saved a wretch like me. My father's breathing slowed, evened out, and then, just as the sun began to rise outside the window, it stopped. Charles Robinson died at 6:47 a.m., holding his daughter's hand, listening to his grandson sing about grace. And somehow, it felt like the right ending to a story that had been broken for far too long. The funeral was larger than my mother's had been. COVID restrictions were lifted. And apparently, my father's congregation had never stopped loving their pastor, even after he'd stepped down years earlier due to health reasons. The church was packed. Hundreds of people who knew Pastor Charles Robinson, the public version, the righteous version, came to pay their respects. Only a handful knew the truth. Malik and I sat in the front row, and I felt the eyes on us, the whispers, the questions. Who were these people? Why were they sitting in the family section? The new pastor gave the eulogy, talking about my father's decades of service, his commitment to the community, his dedication to faith. None of it felt true. But none of it felt false either. My father had been both, the devoted pastor and the flawed man, the righteous preacher and the coward who abandoned his daughter. People are rarely just one thing. At the burial, as they lowered his casket into the ground, right next to an empty plot he'd purchased years ago for my mother. Though she was buried across town, I placed a single rose on the polished wood. Rest easy, I whispered. You're free now. We both are. Malik stood beside me, wearing his great-grandfather's watch, and draped his arm around my shoulders. You okay, Mama? Yeah, baby. I think I am. And I was. 3 months later, Malik declared for the NFL draft. He was projected to go in the first round, possibly top 10. Scouts called him the most pro-ready quarterback in the draft class. Analysts praised his accuracy, his leadership, his football IQ. But when they asked him about his success, about what drove him, he always gave the same answer. My mother and my grandmother taught me that where you start doesn't determine where you finish, that hard work and character matter more than circumstances. Everything I am is because of them. Draft day was in late April. We flew to Detroit, me, Angela, Keisha, Mrs. Patterson, and a handful of people who loved us through the hard years. I wore a dress my mother had bought me for nursing school graduation, never worn, saved for a special occasion. This felt special enough. Malik wore a custom suit and his great-grandfather's watch. When the commissioner walked to the podium and announced, with the 8th pick in the NFL draft, the Atlanta Falcons select Malik Robinson, quarterback, University of Georgia. I screamed and cried and jumped and hugged everyone around me, because my son, my baby boy who'd been born in a public hospital to a teenage mother with nothing, was now an NFL player. Coming home. To Atlanta, to the city that had raised him. The cameras found us in the crowd. And the announcers told a version of our story. Sanitized, inspirational, missing the sharp edges and dark nights. But that was okay. Some stories are too complicated for broadcast television. Malik's first press conference with the Falcons was a week later. I sat in the audience, watching him field questions with grace and humility. Malik, how does it feel to be drafted by your hometown team? It's a dream come true. I grew up watching the Falcons, and now I get to play for them. Plus, it means my mama can come to every home game without traveling. He grinned, finding me in the crowd. And trust me, she will. The reporters laughed. Your story has been inspiring to a lot of people. Single mothers, kids from difficult circumstances. What would you say to them? Malik leaned forward, his expression serious. I'd say that your circumstances don't define you. My mama was 17, pregnant, and kicked out by her own father. People expected her to fail. Expected me to become another statistic. But she refused to let that be our story. She worked 3 jobs, went to nursing school, raised me to understand that respect and hard work matter more than talent. And my grandmother, Ava Robinson, who passed away in 2020, she sacrificed everything so we could have a chance. His voice cracked slightly. Everything I do, every game I play, every touchdown I throw, it's for them. It's to honor the women who loved me enough to fight for me when the world said I wasn't worth it. So to anyone out there who feels like they're starting behind, like the odds are stacked against them, I see you. I was you, and I'm telling you that your start doesn't determine your finish. You get to write your own ending. I was crying openly by then, and I didn't care who saw. That night, Malik's first jersey, number 7, Robinson on the back, sold out in 3 hours, within a week. You couldn't walk through Atlanta without seeing his name. On billboards, in sports bars, on the backs of kids playing pickup, football in parks across the city. The name my father had tried to erase was now everywhere, and it stood for something he'd never taught me, that resilience and love are stronger than pride. That family isn't about biology or perfection, but about showing up. That redemption is always possible, even when it seems too late. I'm 35 years old now. Malik is 21 and starting his rookie season with the Falcons. I still work at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Still find purpose in caring for sick kids and terrified parents. I bought a house, a real house with a yard and a porch and a guest room for when Malik comes home. On my mantle, I keep 3 photos, one of my mother holding newborn Malik, one of Malik in his UGA uniform, and one, newer, of me, Malik, and my father at that last dinner. All of us smiling despite everything, because that's the truth of it. We're all complicated. We all carry scars. We all make mistakes that hurt the people we love. But we also all have the capacity for change, for grace, for forgiveness, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that acknowledges it and chooses to move forward anyway. My mother used to say, the forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it changes what you carry in your heart. She was right. I don't carry anger anymore. I don't carry the weight of my father's rejection or the shame of being a teenage mother or the exhaustion of those years when survival was all I could manage. I carry gratitude instead. Gratitude for a mother who chose me over comfort, gratitude for a son who became my purpose, gratitude for a second chance I never expected with a father who finally understood what he'd lost, gratitude for a life that didn't look anything like I planned but turned out better than I could have imagined. Last week, Malik played his first NFL game. I sat in the stands at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, wearing my Robinson jersey, and watched my son take the field for the Atlanta Falcons. The announcer's voice boomed through the stadium. Now entering the game, number 7, quarterback Ava Robinson, and 70,000 people chanted his name. Robinson, Robinson, Robinson. I thought about that night 21 years ago, when I was 17, pregnant and homeless. When my father told me I'd shame the family, when I thought my life was over. I thought about my mother, choosing me over everything else. I thought about every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every moment I wanted to give up but didn't. And I thought about my father's last words. Family is all that matters. He was right. Not the family you're born into, but the family you build. The family that shows up. The family that loves you, not despite your flaws, but through them. That's the legacy worth leaving. That's the story worth telling. And as I watched my son, my beautiful, brilliant son, throw his first NFL touchdown, I knew with absolute certainty we made it. Against every odd, every obstacle, every person who said we couldn't, we made it. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.